The question really that is going to pertain to most of the program is the question of liberty. Do we want to be a free people? And in order to be a free people, we need a free press. In order to be a free people, we need at least a relatively free economic system, don't we? I mean, the founders of the country thought so. They fought a revolution over taxation. They also fought a revolution over freedom of speech. And these issues come up now in the context of what's going on in this country. So first I want to discuss the press, but not just the usual rat-a-tat-tat. You'll see what I mean. And then I want to talk about economics. Do we all really believe in a free economic system, or do we make excuses about it? And we really don't. So let's take the first part of this. And there are other things to get into too, but let's take the first part of this. The President of the United States is in Britain. The President of the United States is in Britain, and we have in the media tormentors and provocateurs. We have some reporters, but they're few and far between, and they're shrinking in numbers. We have pseudo-reporters for the most part. And you have people like Jim Acosta, who have as their purpose to draw attention to themselves. And so they disrupt actual events in the name of trying to get questions answered, when in fact, that's really not what they're doing. They never treated Barack Obama this way, and they never would. So there is a hostility, an ideological hostility, a personal hostility with certain of these pseudo-reporters toward the President of the United States. There was during the campaign, there was when he was president-elect, there is now. And it's not just CNN and Jim Acosta. It's the vast majority of these pseudo-media. They don't like being called fake news, so I call them pseudo. Just as well. And they are pseudo-media. Jake Tapper is a pseudo-reporter, as an example. Andrea Mitchell is a pseudo-reporter. We have individuals who go in and out of government. They'll work for Democrats and in some cases Republicans, but the vast majority Democrats, and then they'll weasel their way back in the media, and maybe they'll go back and work for another Democrat. And that, in the so-called pseudo-profession that is pseudo-media, is perfectly fine. But it's not perfectly fine. They are the Peter Strokes of the media. And I don't like it, Democrat or Republican, for that matter. Now, in addition, you have these events that go on outside the country now, the President of the United States in England. And is he compelled to take a question from one of the news outlets, which is particularly open in their hostility toward him? And I don't mean from a media point of view. I mean from an ideological point of view. And if he doesn't take the questions of Jim Acosta, if he doesn't allow Jim Acosta to turn a press event with another world leader into a food fight, does that mean the President of the United States is rejecting freedom of the press, or does it mean that Jim Acosta and CNN, NBC, and the others are abusing their authority? Again, I'm not saying they shouldn't have freedom of speech. That's not my point, or freedom of the press. My point is, what are they doing with it? And does the president have to play along to the demise of his own administration? So let's begin at the beginning. Here is the president with Jim Acosta, who is a well-known mudball thrower. Cut two, go.
Mr. President, since you attacked CNN, can I ask you a question?
John Roberts, go ahead, John.
Can I ask you a question?
No. John Roberts, go ahead. CNN's fake news. I don't take questions. I don't take questions from CNN. CNN is fake news. I don't take questions from CNN. John Roberts of Fox. Let's go to a real network. John, let's go.
Well, we're a real network too, sir.
You're a network, but you're an ideological network. You're an ideological network. Is there a single conservative host on CNN? Well, we're objective. No, you're not. There are left-wing hosts on Fox, like Shep Smith is clearly a left-winger. And there are others. who are more liberal. There are actually some who are actual reporters. There are very few on CNN. CNN has remade itself over the years from a news operation to a MSNBC wannabe operation. But this isn't my point either. I want to continue for a moment. John Roberts took a lot of heat at Fox because he followed up with a question, but he didn't defend Mr. Acosta and CNN. So he was trashed by people at CNN. He was trashed by phonies like David Frum. He was trashed, left and right. He didn't come to CNN's defense. Is it his obligation to come to CNN's defense? Is it his obligation? No, it's not his obligation because the president is not attacking freedom of the press. He's refusing to deal with an ideologue who's a provocateur and a self-promoter. But John Roberts felt the need later on to do just that because he came under tremendous attack by the pseudo-profession called the media. Cut 3, go.
I want to point out, Harris, before we go, something happened at the press conference that I think needs addressing. The president called out one of my colleagues, Kristen Welker of NBC, as dishonest and said that NBC News was dishonest. He also called out CNN as not a real network, fake news. Well, let me just add that I know Kristen Welker. She's a friend of mine. She is as honest as the day is long. To call her dishonest is unfair. I used to work at CNN. They have fine journalists there who risk their lives to cover the news around the world, and to say that they are not a real network or fake news is also unfair. So just wanted to add that in there.
So he felt the need to, and maybe legitimately, to defend his former colleagues at CNN. Then he's talking about Kristen Welker. Kristen Welker, who, as I understand it, is a pseudo-reporter for NBC. And here's how that went. Cut 1, go.
Spent the week taking on NATO allies, criticizing Prime Minister May on her own soil. And I wonder are you giving Russian President Vladimir Putin the upper hand heading into your talks, given that you are challenging these alliances that he seeks to break up and destroy?
See, that's such dishonest reporting because, of course, it happens to be NBC, which is possibly worse than CNN. Possibly.
Stop. Now, how is this destroying freedom of the press? It's not destroying freedom of the press in the least. In my view, he's giving his opinion. Many of you agree with his opinion. All right, that's enough. Now, why am I going through this? Because I happen to be spending many, many hours now, late at night and on the weekends, and there'll be many, many more studying this issue. The history of the media. The backbenchers will do one of two things. They'll suddenly jump in and do some superficial research or have somebody do it for them, or they'll plagiarize. But mostly, over the weekend, they're very busy doing other things. Now, that said, CNN has an obligation to reveal itself. CNN has an obligation to reveal itself as a media outlet for the Democrat Party. What CNN is doing is poisoning the notion of a free press. No press can be wholly objective or bipartisan or multi-partisan, because human beings don't conduct themselves that way, nor do institutions. But they can strive to be. CNN says it strives to be, but it doesn't. CNN has as its purpose, just listen to the various hosts. They're almost a conga line that pretty much dances and sings the same way. They have a choir there. They have as their purpose to demean, degrade, and undermine this president. Now, that's perfectly fine. But reveal yourself. Don't pretend you're a news operation. Jake Tapper, you're not a reporter. You can slap yourself on the back and pretend to be a reporter. You're not a reporter. Jim Acosta is a court jester. He's not a reporter. The Democrats love Jim Acosta. Why? The Democrats love Jake Tapper, even though now and then he pretends to be Tim Russert. He's no Tim Russert. Tim Russert was a reporter. One of a handful still in this country while he was alive. But Tapper's not. Tapper's pedigree indicates that he's not. But he's not the only one. Andrea Mitchell. Andrea Mitchell has spent decades trashing Republicans. Decades. Now, we all know this. We're not stupid. We are, at least theoretically, consumers of the news. MSLSD, a.k.a. MSNBC, a.k.a. Nut Jobs, they pretty much reveal who they are. They don't say they're for the Democrat Party, but everybody knows. You want to listen to the hard left kooks, you go to MSNBC. Now, CNN has surrendered its news operation. It still pretends to be a news operation. It can't go through a damn airport without CNN being on TV because they monopolize this, as I've talked about over the years. They monopolize it somehow, some way. And so the President of the United States, this is one of the reasons I couldn't be happier with this president. He's exposed it. He's exposed them. All those decades where these pseudo-media outlets went after George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, and you can go back. All those decades. Walter Cronkite. Who else? Dan Rather. Tom Brokaw. They were all of the same ilk. Now, they behaved themselves a little better, but not much. They were very pretentious about who they were, but still they are and were who they are and are. So here's the point to you. Who is damaging freedom of the press in this country? News outlets like CNN that won't reveal what they really are, who they really are, while pretending to give you news. The New York Times, which has, I don't believe, any time in modern history endorsed a Republican for President of the United States, and same with the Washington Post. These are old-time newspapers, some of them yellow journalists, yellow sheets, for the Democrat Party or for the ideological progressive left. Now, when you point out their editorials, they'll tell you their editorials are different than their news pages. How so? How so? Because the editorial pages, truthfully, are more honest than the news pages. At least they call themselves editorials, opinion pages, op-eds, and so forth. The news operations don't do any of that. They don't do any of that. When they determine what to cover, how to cover it, and what to omit, and what not to cover, they're making decisions. They're making decisions. When the New York Times, throughout World War II, throughout the Third Reich, throughout the Holocaust, did everything it could to push that news to the back pages, and they have slapped themselves about it in the past few decades. A little late, I'd say. Was that an editorial decision? Of course it was an editorial decision. If it had been a news decision, they would have reported about it. But they didn't. Let's talk in more modern times. How long did it take to even know that Barack Obama's minister, Jeremiah Wright, and Barack Obama were as tight as they were? Other than conservatives. How often were we told it's a non-issue? How often were we told that his association with Bill Ayers is a domestic terrorist? A domestic terrorist. A domestic terrorist. Involved in violence. How long were we told that, well, you know, it's not a big deal, that's racist, you can't bring it? How many times were we told that? Think about it. And so, what I'm calling for here is that these media outlets that are aligned with the Democrat Party or aligned with an ideological force admit it. That's all. And then we can trust them to be what they truly are. But as it turns out now, you hear this guy Acosta, or you hear these other reporters, and they have to defend themselves against, you know, Trump and so forth and so. All Trump is doing is calling out the obvious. What about Fox, you say? Well, Fox is more conservative than the others. Well, should they reveal themselves? If Fox gets rid of all those Obama people that they put on those panels, and Shep, and some of the others, Chris Wallace, who really is a professional in my view, gets rid of those people, then they can call themselves a Republican Party cable network. But they try more than the others. They try more than the others to do what they're supposed to do. It's just that they're so rare because they're not part of the hardcore, radical, progressive media outlets that they're viewed as this really, really right-wing operation. And I can tell you, being there right now, that's simply not the case. We'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
What were the media like at the founding of this country? Well, you know, before there was a cohesive country, obviously we had colonies. And newspapers were heavily restricted. There weren't many newspapers. One of the great early printers and newspaper men was Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin's older brother was among the first, and he was a printer newspaper man in Boston, Massachusetts. And they would get in trouble from time to time by criticizing the colonies, the assemblies in the colonies. And sometimes they would shut down their newspapers, or shut down their pamphlets, or shut down their printing presses, or fine them. Sometimes they would imprison them, not necessarily Benjamin Franklin, but others. Often you had to get a license or permit. Early on in the American colonies, you aware of that? I'm certainly not advocating that. I'm just telling you we didn't always have this so-called notion of freedom of the press. I'll be right back. Let me give you an example, a modern example of what I'm talking about, like today. Robert Mueller brings indictments against 12 Russians who are part of the Putin regime. Rod Rosenstein gives a press conference. He makes it abundantly clear not a single American has been indicted, that these Russians were trying to interfere with our election. It's all over the news. It's Friday. They played it on Friday. They can't get their hands on a single one of these Russians. Not one of these Russians is going to do prison time. Not one. And the media run with this like it's some monumental event. It's a non-event. This should have been handled through a counterintelligence investigation. That's why these matters are not criminal matters. Because you can't get your hands on the defendant. Now we have defendants who are in Russia, who work for Putin or used to work for Putin. What are we supposed to do about it? Seriously, what are we supposed to do about it? And then I see some media types say, lay off Mueller. He's doing his job. See how great he is, blah, blah, blah. Lay off Mueller. He's doing his job. Is there a single public official, ladies and gentlemen, we should lay off if we don't think they're doing their job? Do you understand what I mean about the media? NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC. Have they ever taken a critical look at Robert Mueller? Have they ever taken a critical look at any of the people on his team? Even certain people on Fox, have they ever taken a critical look at Robert Mueller? Or members of his team? No, they haven't. And yet he's an enormously powerful man who, if he wants, can seek to bring down a president. But they're not going to bring him down. Do you want to know why? They're not even going to question Mueller. Now, why do you think they're not going to question Mueller? Yes, because of their ideologies. But what else? Because he and his people are sources. That's why. So they don't touch them. They don't touch them. And they're not going to. There's a present-day example. So, you know, if the media are going to operate as if they are focusing towards one base of one party or another base of another party, they should reveal themselves. That's all. They should reveal them. But they won't. Because they get to have it both ways. When you watch on C-SPAN the White House Correspondents' Dinner, some of you who do, They almost never have a comedian who isn't of the hard left. Very rarely. Very rarely. It's trashing conservatives. It's trashing Republicans. The jokes against, like, Obama, they're friendly. They're funny little jokes and so forth. Not when it comes to Trump or his staff. Not when it came to George W. Bush. Not when it came to, you name it. We all see this. We all know it. But we are told that we are forced to accept their reality, which isn't reality at all. It's not reality at all. Now, I was talking about early on in American history. I'm not going to get into every detail, but obviously there was a big jump over a period of decades. There was a famous case. And the same people who fought for liberty against the monarchy in England fought for liberty in our country, the ability to say what they wanted to say within reason, quote unquote, through pamphlets and newspapers and so forth. Even after the Revolutionary War, there were limits. It's not that there were limits placed on newspaper, there were limits. And basically what they said was, you can print whatever you want, but you can also be sued for defamation and slander, which were much more broadly defined back then. So you'll pay a price if you're inaccurate, or you'll pay a price if I think you ought to pay a price. What am I saying? I'm trying to say that today, you listen to these egomaniacs on MSNBC and CNN and commentators that they bring in, self-serving commentators selected to advance an ideology from the New York Times or the Washington Post or the AP or whatever. And they tell you we have never faced any time in our history this kind of threat against press freedom. The press has never been freer in this country, which is why you have the Don Lemons and the Wolf Blitzers and the conga line of miscreants and malcontents that are on MSNBC and CNN. I just picked those two out. You know, there's a whole group of them. You've never had a freer media and a more abusive media because they're dishonest in terms of self-identity. They won't identify themselves as what they actually are. They know who they are. They know what they think. We do too. But we're supposed to play this game that they're news people. When you watch those White House press conferences with Huckabee Sanders, those reporters aren't trying to get information. They're trying to score points. They're trying to move an agenda. They never conducted themselves that way against Barack Obama or any of his press spokesmen. Not that I can remember. Not that I can remember. So it's very, very dishonest. So that's liberty issue number one that we should discuss tonight, because it's a big deal. Now, liberty issue number two. Because liberty is liberty, folks. It comes in different forms. It can be economic. It can be physical, personal, individualistic. It can be intellectual. That is what you say, what you think, what you write, so forth and so on. And it can always come under attack. See, I would argue that the modern media, or the pseudo-media today, is actually undermining the freedom of the press by the way they conduct themselves and the way they abuse that phrase. But I want to get into the other liberty issue. It's an economic issue. And this is where some of you are going to turn left and just keep going. It's an economic issue. It's as much in the news, or let me check that, it's as relevant as everything I just discussed about the media. And that's trade. Trade. The earliest civilizations wanted trade, were involved in trade. They wanted to know what's on the other side of the world. What do they have that we don't have? We want what they have. What kind of knowledge do they have? What kind of information do they have? Who are they? What are they? You see, to close off trade, just stick with me, is to close off, among other things, your intellectual capacity to learn, to gain information, to gain knowledge. Look at North Korea. You've got people over there who have no idea what's going on in the rest of the world. They don't learn about the Enlightenment. They don't learn about Reformation. They don't learn about republicanism, constitutionalism. They don't learn any of that stuff. They're not aware of it. In addition to the material wealth that is denied them. Trade is trade in material, it's trade in services, but it's also trade in creativity, ingenuity, knowledge, information. We are the strongest economic force the planet has ever seen because there was a period of time, largely in the 19th century, when we were virtually tariff-free. I'm not talking about the rest of the world, I'm talking about us. The left attacks the Industrial Revolution. And now I find so-called populists attacking it too. Maybe not directly, but nonetheless. That's why they attack John Rockefeller, Mellon, Carnegie, Ford. Not talking about their political views. Robber barons, they used to call them. They and others brought us mobility, electricity, heat in our homes, air conditioning in our homes. They and others propelled this nation into an economic juggernaut the planet has never seen before. And despite all that you've been told and learned, the vast majority of people in the United States benefited from it and would benefit from it and would benefit from it, as would those parts of the world that engaged in it. Capitalism. We should not be afraid of material that is available overseas. We should not be afraid of products and services that are available overseas. We should not be afraid of knowledge and information that's available overseas. If other countries are afraid, that's their problem. If they want to be poor, that's their problem. If they want to be dumber, that's their problem. I'm not talking about when they steal our technology. That's a whole other issue. I'm talking about trade. What is trade? Of course, we have copyright laws, we have trademark laws, we have patent laws, we have proprietary information laws, we have export regimes. That's all good. That's all good. That creates it's like a courtroom. You need rules, right? Certain rules of trade, certain rules in the courtroom, certain rules of behavior in your family. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But when the government intervenes, for the purpose of claiming we need a level playing field or things need to be fair, that's irrational. And this is where some of you are going to take a left turn and leave me. I can't help it. I hope you'll be inquisitive enough to stay with me. It's irrational. A tariff is a tax. You're going to tax the American people to punish another country? You're going to raise the price of toasters and washing machines and dishwashers and automobiles on average Americans, middle-class Americans, by potentially in the aggregate thousands and thousands of dollars to punish other governments and other countries? Do you see how absolutely irrational that is? I know all the phony jingoistic arguments. We need to protect our industrial heartland. But we don't protect our industrial heartland by massively increasing the cost of products on the American people, who will buy less of them. I will tell you. Take a look at steel. We have a huge tariff placed on steel now. If any country wants to sell steel into this country, well, let's just pick one. Canada. Canada, which sells most of the steel that we get overseas to us. Not China, Canada. A 25% tax. That tax isn't on Canada. That tax isn't on Canadian steel companies. That tax isn't on the Canadian taxpayer. That tax is on you. Now, our domestic companies, they're very competitive. They don't sit still and say, all right, good. Now we can control foreign imports of steel by driving up the price to the American consumer and American businesses. GM, Chrysler, Ford, the assembly line men and women who work there, last time I checked, they're not billionaires and millionaires. They're hardworking American citizens. They're blue-collar citizens who work with their hands. Well, they're going to be affected negatively. Now, these American steel companies that you think are so patriotic, they raise their prices too. You know why? Because the president has limited competition. That's why. They raise their prices too. You raise 25% of tax on steel coming into this country on the American people. These steel companies don't sit here and say, you know what, we're going to drop our prices. You know what they do? They increase their prices. Because now's the time to really make it. And we subsidize that kind of behavior. And so in order to protect maybe 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 jobs, we lose 200,000 jobs. Downstream. Is that liberty? Is that what makes a country wealthy? All right, I have to take a break. We'll be right back. We're going to start with a gentleman by the name of Rocky. Tampa, Florida, on the Mark Levin app. How are you, Rocky?
Hello, Mark. I am doing well, and you are like my idol. I have learned so much from you.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the work that you put in. Mark, you are the rudder of political exactness. And I propose to you that we have a horrible image problem in the perception of political, viewing the political spectrum. You know, it's left and right and center. And these fibbing liberals would have you believe that Fox News is so right-wing, and yet sometimes they're left and center. So I got to thinking the Constitution should be our center point. And that's where the bird flies. It's right there on the Constitution. Everything to the left of that would be to the left, and everything to the right of that would be to the right.
Isn't this sort of what I've been saying for some time now? When you look at the political spectrum, it's really a circle. And on that line, not in the middle, on the line at the bottom of that circle, we constitutionalists / conservatives, because we believe in the founding principles of the country. To the left, as you go around, it gets more and more leftist, and then at the top, it is, Marxism. To the left of that, as it comes back towards constitutionalism, you have progressivism and so forth. Then when you go back to the top point, you have some form of fascism, if you will. And then as you move down, you have, this, that, and the other. But I could not agree more. I've espoused this myself, that I don't want to call us moderates or centrists, because that's again, they have their own definitions. We are, as you point out, we are the center of the spectrum. If you believe in the founding of the nation, we are the center of the spectrum. You and I and this magnificent, beloved, massive audience, we are defending the center. We're defending the heart and soul of the nation. We're not on any wing. We're not right wing. We're not extremists. We're nothing of the sort. So I agree with you, Rocky. By the way, is your real name Rocky?
Yes, it is.
I like it.
Thank you. You'll see me running up and down the steps.
All right, well, take care of yourself. Well, you won't see me doing that, that's for sure. Kathy, Bend, Oregon, the great KBND. Go.
Hi. I am taking it back to your opening point about the media and how they try to point themselves to be unbiased. But we have heard time and again, starting with that I can recall, Sonia Sotomayor talking about how she would be a better judge because she's a white Latina and it brings her experiences to her judgments. And then you got Comey that says if an investigator goes into an investigation without knowing where it's going, he's a bad investigator. So then you have Strzok up there before Congress saying he's able to do his job and not let his personal opinions get in the way of him doing his job, which we all know is baloney. And then it brings me to the media and how they portray themselves as being fair and honest and unbiased. But I think it's the biggest danger facing our country is our media, our dishonest media that is not giving the vast majority of the American public the truth.
I agree. And what I'm saying is, fine, they don't have to change. At least put the right label on what they're doing.
Exactly.
Stop telling us that you are defending press freedom when you're criticized. You're not defending press freedom when you're criticized. You're trying to conceal who you are. And nobody here that I'm aware of is trying to curtail freedom of the press. I mean, we conservatives are the one who defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It is the progressive statist left that does not. So if MSNBC wants to be, insane left, fine. If CNN wants to be insane left and pretend that they're not, fine. But we want to put a label on them. And they should self-identify. Remember that phrase, self-identify? Well, they should self-identify. CNN should self-identify as a Democrat or liberal news operation. Shouldn't be ashamed of it. That's what they are. MSNBC should self-identify as a radical left news organization, or better yet, media operation is what they actually are. Just be honest about what you're doing. Stop playing games. We all know what you're doing. And so when you get out there and you go on about you're defending freedom of the press because you're being called out as to actually who you are, no, you're not defending freedom of the press.